Welcome to the Leader's Edge podcast. I'm your host, Chris Kolenda, retired Army colonel, combat leader, author, and speaker. I work with leaders who want to create unshakable business endurance. So tune in as I translate powerful leadership lessons from the battlefield and apply them to your business. From Gettysburg and Normandy to your next biggest business challenges and opportunities, this podcast helps you gain the clarity, confidence, and competitive edge to steer with purpose and win decisively. Ready to sharpen your leadership? Let's dive in. How viscerally do your employees understand your expectations? Throughout my career leading, 95% of the time, when somebody didn't meet my expectations, the fault was right here. Because I didn't make them clear. I was expecting people to read my mind. But of course, they've got their own point of view and perspectives. And so whenever I failed, or whenever people didn't meet my expectations, 95% of the time, fault's right there in the mirror. In this episode of the Leader's Edge, we're going to show some of the consequences of unclear expectations because it played a decisive role in these battles. And it plays a decisive role in business today too. So check out this chart. When it comes to creating an unstoppable workforce, of course, people have to understand your expectations. And in periods of change, how viscerally do your employees get your expectations? Now, according to Gallup and HBR and SHRM, in a normal situation, it's about half and half. About 50% of employees report that they understand what's expected of them at work, and 50% say, yeah, not so much. But we don't live in normal times. We don't live in sort of static times where things are steady state. We live in dynamic times. And in dynamic times, here's what's happened. 70%, well, that should be a percent, not an and%. 70% of employees report that they don't know what's expected of them at work. And only 30% in these sort of periods of dynamic change report that they understand what is expected of them at work. And so the question becomes, what is happening at the black line where people go from unclear expectations to clear expectations? And commanders on both sides in both battles dealt with this very situation. And that's what we're going to focus on today. In the lead up to the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee had split his army into three corps, so into three business units, if you will. And they were operating semi-autonomously, especially Ewell's corps, which was in the lead and separated by a rather significant distance from Lee and the other two corps. Now, as Lee finally got reports that the Union Army was moving towards Gettysburg, Lee sent flash traffic to all of his three corps commanders, Ewell, Longstreet, and Hill, saying, we need to consolidate our forces or we're going to get attacked piecemeal. So the best place to consolidate is Gettysburg. So everybody beat feet to Gettysburg. And so that's what they did. The Union, of course, got to Gettysburg first. And there was big cavalry engagement with a big engagement with Buford's cavalry. Ewell's corps met with elements of the 11th Corps. This Union Corps, 11th Corps, was fairly new. They had broken at Chancellorsville, resulting in a big rout. Very low confidence. They broke again, with the exception of like one brigade, which we talk about on the ground. And so Ewell and his corps move right through the Union position as they're breaking and get into the town of Gettysburg. So just on the far side of Gettysburg is this high ground. So Ewell and his corps move into Gettysburg on the heels of the Union retreat. And on the far side of the town is this massive high ground called East Cemetery Hill. And Ewell's forces, by this time, they had been marching a long time. They were pretty tired. They'd just gone through a fight, and now some looting began in Gettysburg because everybody wants food. They want shoes because Lee's army was starving and barefoot. And so some of the discipline had begun to break down in Ewell's corps. At the same time, Ewell could see that on the far side of town, you've got this high ground. If you own the high ground, then you put yourself in an unbeatable position. And Lee then sends a courier galloping over to Ewell and says to Ewell, take that hill if practicable. Now, had Lee given those same orders to Jackson, so Jackson was the previous Corps commander who had gotten killed by friendly fire at Chancellorsville. Jackson was also Lee's most trusted lieutenant. So if Lee told Jackson, take that hill if practicable, Jackson would be on that hill, even if he had to crawl on his hands and knees himself to take it. That's just kind of aggressive commander he was. Ewell's a bit different. Ewell had just returned to the fight. He lost his leg a year earlier at the Battle of Second Bull Run. And so now he is where he was a division commander. So now he's been promoted a level up. He's got a level of autonomy he's not used to as a corps commander. And it's his first time back after losing a leg. So Lee tells Ewell, take that hill if practicable. Ewell looks at his division commanders, and two of his division commanders counsel that it's going to be too hard to take that hill. Men are too tired, too disorganized, going to be too hard. Now, one of Ewell's junior leaders pleading with him, I will go myself. Let me take that hill. Eventually, Ewell decides that they, instead of taking that hill, which was very poorly defended at that point by the Union, Ewell decides that they're going to stay in Gettysburg. They're going to attack the hill tomorrow after they've had a chance to rest, reconsolidate, and in his mind, have better prospects for success. And of course, during that night, Union forces are arriving in East Cemetery Hill and a place called Culp's Hill, which is a really massive hilltop, and digging in the rocky terrain. By the time the sun rises on day 2 of Gettysburg, so July 2nd, 1863, the Union is in an unbeatable position, dug in, reinforced, and Ewell would spend the rest of the battle, that second day and also the final day, July 3rd, of impaling himself and his corps on these dug-in Union defenses. And of course, to no avail. So Lee had failed to set his expectations clearly. Ewell thought he was doing the right thing. And as a result, the Union was able to occupy the high ground, create this unbeatable position. And one of the points that proved decisive. And it all came down to communication. Now, after the battle, Ewell would say, there were a lot of mistakes made at Gettysburg, and I myself made most of them. So Ewell has certainly taken accountability for his role in the loss. The more interesting, though, is Lee's failure to communicate expectations for Ewell. So when we go back to this bar graph, Ewell did not clearly understand Lee's expectations because Lee expected him to be up on that hill. But what he said was, take that hill if practicable. And in Ewell's mind, it wasn't without taking significant losses. And so in his mind, not practicable. But on Lee's mind, he expected if Ewell was the last person in that corps and was low-crawled up and was able to plant a flag up there on the top of East Cemetery Hill, that would have been success. So clearly there is a massive gulf in expectations between the two. So how do you deal with that? This, of course, is one of these great conversations that we have out there on the ground on top of East Cemetery Hill as we're imagining this battle. So what do leaders do to create clear expectations? Well, the most basic way is to use the 4 W's. Who is responsible for what? So that why, by when. So who is responsible? I've made this mistake plenty of times myself. We just say it in general to the whole audience, to everybody around the table. Nobody really knows who's got the baton and is supposed to complete that part of the race. And so nobody picks it up. So we have got to put the baton clearly in somebody's hands by explaining who does what. So what is it that you want them to accomplish? I want you to attack and seize East Cemetery Hill. And then the prompt, so that, and I encourage leaders to use those 2 words exactly. What, so that, the why. And the why is the results, benefits, outcomes that you expect by doing X. And again, when I look at the failures I had as a leader, oftentimes I failed to do the why. I would describe who's responsible. I would describe what they were responsible for, but I wasn't always very good at describing the results, benefits, outcomes that I wanted them to achieve by doing the what. And the result was people would just do what they were told, fail to seize opportunities to either get the results, benefits, outcomes done faster, or would just continue doing what they were told, even if it wasn't leading to the results, benefits, and outcomes. So what I learned is, I got to say, so that. I've got to say, here's what I want you to do so that we get these results, benefits, and outcomes. So the 4th W is by when. We need the discipline to set deadlines, because deadlines focus attention, they illustrate priorities, and also they let people know how much time they have to get the job done. One of the great things about deadlines on the priorities front is when you have everything all due at once, then that's a lack of discipline on our part in terms of communicating guidance, and our subordinates ought to have every right to say, okay, boss, you've got 3 major projects due on the same day. Which one is most important to you? And so by when is a forcing function for us to describe our priorities and to make sure that our direct reports have the time and the support and resources they need to get the job done, to execute the who does what, so that why. And now let's reimagine the battle at Gettysburg. And when Lee's communicating to Ewell knows it's him, so the who is pretty clear because the message is to Ewell. Does what? Seize that hill, if practicable. So there's no why and there's no by when. And the result is that Ewell does what he thinks is the right thing, which is give people a rest, let them reconsolidate, we'll attack the hill the next day. Probably doesn't have sight of the big picture, doesn't know how many Union forces are coming. Lee didn't know how many Union forces are coming, only that they were now in Gettysburg. So imagine if Lee had given his instructions a little bit different. Ewell, to seize East Cemetery Hill and the high ground around Gettysburg so that we can bring up the rest of the corps, or so that we can bring up the rest of the army, so that we seize unbeatable positioning and we get there faster than the Union does. And I want you to do that by nightfall. Ewell's orders at that point would have been very, very crystal clear, and he would have executed, because there's every indication that Ewell simply would have executed what he'd been told to do. But Lee didn't tell him. Lee didn't give him those precise instructions, didn't give him the why, didn't give him a deadline, and Ewell created those for himself. And the result at Gettysburg was the Union allowed to gain the high ground, which then proved decisive in the battle's outcome. During the Battle of Antietam, General McClellan, the Union commander, had Robert E. Lee and his Confederate army right where he wanted him. Outnumbered him probably 3-1, had Lee's army essentially surrounded on 3 different sides. And so as the Union forces are moving towards Antietam Creek, for some reason, McClellan keeps them behind the creek and waits on September 16th, which allows Lee more time to gather more forces and shore up his position. So the morning of the 17th, McClellan is finally ready to attack. And he sends Hooker's corps to the north along with 2 others. And he's also got a corps in the center by the middle bridge and a corps on the left flank near what's called Burnside's Bridge. There's a picture of it. And Burnside's corps was there at Burnside's Bridge. Now, taking this bridge and getting up on that high ground you see in the foreground there would allow Burnside to threaten Lee's retreat across the Potomac River near Sharpsburg. So this is absolutely crucial position. And so you would think that as important and vital as this attack is to McClellan's overall plan to defeat Lee, that he would make sure that Burnside was crystal clear on McClellan's expectations. As you can guess, sadly, that was not the case. And McClellan had all of his plans in his head, and he rarely conveyed them in writing, and certainly it wasn't clear to his subordinates exactly what they were supposed to do. So Burnside figured he'd be attacking some point in the day. He's waiting on word. And meanwhile, McClellan thinks that Burnside could read his mind, that Burnside's going to do what McClellan thinks in his head he's going to do, but never told him. So Burnside is sitting on the opposite side of the river, didn't use the evening time to reconnoiter a ford site because, of course, this bridge is a choke point. Everybody's going to be defending the bridge with the Confederates up on the high ground. So naturally, the prudent commander would want to look for alternative options to get from where you are now to where you want to be. Burnside didn't do that. There was a report of a ford 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile away, but they never bothered to reconnoiter it, and certainly didn't start pushing forces across. And so the battle is raging on the 17th, and Burnside's hearing all of this, but he's making no effort to get across the bridge. He's waiting for orders. And meanwhile, McClellan believes that Burnside is going to be attacking at any moment, but he never quite does. So finally, McClellan's like, what is going on? And Burnside didn't know that you wanted to be attacked now, so he begins attacking. And he's attacking, so we'd wasted hours at this point. Attacking frontally across this bridge. It's just getting repulsed back and back and back, time and time again. Eventually, the Confederates, towards the end of the afternoon, start running out of ammunition. And one of Burnside's units had finally found this ford and had crossed it. And so now the Burnside is able to get up on this high ground. But he had wasted so much time from first light until about 4 p.m. by the time he's on the high ground and he sees the city of village of Sharpsburg and he has the ability now to cut off Lee's retreat because he wasted so much time. General A.P. Hill from the Confederates had marched all day 15 miles from Harper's Ferry all the way up to Antietam and hits Burnside's forces in the flank. Burnside's attacks collapse, and Lee is able to escape across the Potomac River. Let's go back to our chart. The first key in communication is the 4 Ws. Who is responsible? In this case, Burnside. What do you want him to do? I want you to attack across this bridge so that, what is the why? So that, number one, you secure our southern flank against counterattack. Number two, you threaten and ideally seize the bridgehead across the Potomac River to cut off Lee's retreat. By when? Key point. He needed a deadline as well, and he should have set up there by 10 a.m. Or I want you up there by 8 a.m. I want you to start your attack by 6 a.m. Whatever the why was and the when, McClellan did not articulate it. And Burnside was not the type that was going to take a whole lot of initiative, and so he's waiting for orders. And the best chance for the Union to have ended the war by destroying Lee's army in 1862 is past. Confederates would live to fight on another 2.5 years. So one of the lessons from this engagement, this example, and is one of the lessons that we love to discuss out there on the battlefields is, first of all, the 4 Ws. And second of all, what this leads also into is just because you say something doesn't mean people receive the same things that you expect them to do. So another process that we discuss is what's called listening to understand. There are 4 modes of listening. There is distracted listening. So you're looking at your phone, you're daydreaming, you're reading something, looking at your computer while somebody is trying to speak with you. And of course, person feels disrespected and you don't hear what they say. The second mode of listening is listening to respond. Now, listening to respond, what happens is somebody is speaking to you and you start formulating your response while they're still talking. Something they said might have triggered you or whatever. You start thinking about your response. And of course, the same brain function that lets you think about your response is the one that governs your ability to process what you're hearing. And so naturally, your internal process is going to trump what's going on the outside, and you miss most of the message. The third mode of listening is listening to win. Listening to win occurs when you decide that your goal is to show how smart you are, how dumb the other person is. You're wanting just to simply win the argument and pounce on anything that they might say. Of course, you're not focused on the overall message. In fact, you're more focused on humiliating the other person or gaining some sort of power over them. And that's never going to lead to a good conversation or relationship. The fourth mode is listening to understand. And listening to understand is a very simple 3-step process. And it's something that we love to discuss and rehearse out there. The first step is somebody is going to state their point of view. Step 1. Step 2, what you are going to do is you are going to restate what they said to their satisfaction. As an example, here's what I think I heard you say. Did I get that about right? Yes, you got that about right. So, General, I think what I heard you say is you want me to attack across this bridge. I'm not sure what time you want me to attack and what you want me to achieve. So, am I hearing that about right? And can you help me understand the gaps? Or on the Lee Ewell, when Lee says, take this hill if practicable, Ewell says, okay, what I want to make sure I understand is you want me to take this hill if practicable. So here comes step 3. Help me to understand what you mean by if practicable. So step 3 is asking some open-ended questions to clarify what the person's saying. So you make sure that you get it, because they may convey something, but it may mean totally different things to you and the other persons. This is exactly what we saw with Lee and Ewell at East Cemetery Hill. So you ask open-ended questions to further understand what the person is stating and that is going to help you close the loop in communication. Now, good delegation communicating works the same way. So in this case, the roles are reversed. You are going to state your guidance using the 4 W's. General, I want you to do this, so that, why, by when, and you convey those instructions. Then you ask essentially for a confirmation brief. In your own words, describe for me your mission and give me a rough idea of how you plan to go about it. This is a great approach to use to make sure that what you said and what they understood and what you hope they understood are the same things. So you get that confirmation brief. And then if you got a very senior person then that you trust, then you just give them the boundaries, let them go. If it's somebody that needs a little bit more attention, or maybe it's their first deer hunt like it was Ewell as a corps commander, then Lee might ask him some open-ended questions. Hey, so under what circumstances do you believe that taking this hill is practicable? And under what circumstances do you believe taking a hill is not practicable? So let's make sure that we are on the same page here. Because again, if Lee's expectation is if Ewell's the last person in that corps and is standing with a flag on East Cemetery Hill, that's good enough. And Ewell's idea is if our folks need to rest and refit, then we're gonna wait the night. Then you expose that gap in understanding through those kinds of open-ended questions. And then again, you're going to be able to close the loop. So listening to understand and communicating so that your people understand is a vital superpower and one of the many lessons that we learn on these battlefields. All right, that is it for this episode of the Leader's Edge podcast. So what we've done in the first several episodes is take you through some parts of the battle and some of the different ways that we can use battlefield stories to illuminate business challenges and help strengthen you and your team so they have stories and a visual model for how they deal with some of the most challenging parts of their business. And then when you associate that visual model, that image, with an emotional story and a powerful battlefield image, now people are going to remember this for a very long time, maybe even the rest of their lives. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a good visual model is worth 1,000 pictures. And if you can create an emotional connection to that visual model, that is worth 1,000 visual models. Thanks for tuning in to the Leader's Edge podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review because it helps more leaders like you find their edge. Do you want to take these lessons further? Well, you can visit my website, chriskolenda.com, for resources, support, and adventure offsites that build unbeatable positioning, help you create an unstoppable workforce, and give you the tools for unwavering inspiration. Until next time, stay decisive, stay inspired, and keep leading from the front.